Chapter 2, A Premonition. A tall, dark-haired, imposing man stood on a balcony, only feet away from the room behind him, mere steps away from the comfort of his large bed. He was high up in the air, overlooking the immense city below him. It was hard not to feel like he had towered over the buildings below, and by contrast the people as well. From this height, he could almost taste the oxygen on his tongue. It was air untainted by the smoke rising up from the city below. It was air untouched by the multitude of large burning rocks plummeting toward the planet, much like the flames highlighted the buildings below. He watched this apocalyptic scene with glazed-over eyes. He should be scared. He should be seeking shelter from the obvious impending doom. He knew this, but he didn't feel anxious at all. He was right where he was supposed to be. He was in control. A mist seemed to fall over his mind that continued for several minutes before being interrupted by a hand gripping his shoulder. He turned to see Bougere standing beside him. It was only then that the man had become nervous. "Mother, I," stammered the man almost incoherently. Would she be displeased? All the livestock and grain would surely be ash by now, but she didn't seem concerned in the least. In fact, she didn't really seem to be there at all. She was almost blurred at the edges. She looked, the man had thought, similar to how he had felt, somewhere or someplace in between. Bougere turned her head toward the flaming city, while the man followed suit, his heart beating faster and faster. An enormous tidal wave was speeding toward the city, speeding towards them. He looked towards his mother, but she was gone. At that moment, the wave began crashing through the city, swallowing both the buildings and the flames that they were imprisoned by. The wave was reaching closer to his position, but something odd was happening. The tidal wave didn't seem to be expanding. When it passed up over a flaming house, the house had come back up from under the water, untouched by fire and looking brand new. It was then that something had clicked in his hazy mind. The wave was not coming for the burning city, it was coming for him. It was climbing up the castle towers to his balcony. It was going to hurt him. It was going to make him pay. He closed his eyes as the color blue began to surround his world, and ice swam through his veins. He was drowning in mist, his lungs about to burst when the blue started to fade. The mist was now swirling in different shapes and colors. The haze began to clear as his eyelids flickered. He was laying on his back now, and for several minutes he didn't dare move. But eventually, King Halim opened his eyes in his warm bed to the familiar greeting of the castle walls. In just under a week of travel together, Endo had learned next to nothing about this mysterious woman he was traveling with. He'd only ever heard her say one word to him, and that was when he asked her name. "Fina," she said meekly, before moving forward without so much as a glance in his direction. With all the information that he had taken in such a short amount of time, it was driving him mad that he couldn't seem to learn anything from her. He wanted to understand her and why they were traveling together, but her reluctance only made the desire to know stronger, though he was met with only silence every time he had asked. Despite this, Endo still made it his mission to protect her as he had promised Abe that he would. On the morning of their departure, Abe and Hakim had seemed so intent on her safety that Endo was the one to escort her, but now that they were on the road together, she didn't seem to need his help at all. She was completely fit to take care of herself. She could hunt and cook her own food. She could make her own bed and fire to sleep beside. She didn't need him at all, so why was he here? To make matters worse, they couldn't even bring horses to Mortu, as it would bring too much attention to Fina. After setting traps for the night, Endo lay beside the fire while Fina slept, and he thought of Sid. He missed the atmosphere of that village. He missed Hakim and Abe, and he missed Sahad most of all. Abe had not told Sahad that Endo would be leaving, and he wasn't to accompany them, as this was supposedly a dangerous task. Endo had respected Abe's wishes and left Sahad behind, but he felt the sense of loss all the same. The next morning, Fina and Endo took their night's catch from the traps and set off towards Mortu. They came west toward the river opposite of Sid and were to follow the river south all the way to the town. "Is Mortu big like Sid?" Endo asked Fina curiously. To his surprise, she gave a dry laugh. Something about this question had amused her, and to his further astonishment, she spoke. "Mortu is much bigger. You'll be in for a nice shock, farm boy." "Farm boy?" Endo replied, insulted. He was met with another chuckle from her that turned into a roar of laughter. Endo was dumbstruck. He'd never seen her emote like this, but he was embarrassed at the reason. Suddenly, Fina stopped laughing and began looking wildly around. "What?" Endo said, still slightly embarrassed. "Shush, I hear something. It sounds like—" Her eyes became wide, and she suddenly grabbed his arm and ran, pulling Endo behind. They ran away from the river and deeper into the plains, when Endo heard the sound too. It was horses, like what Endo had heard Sahad riding the first time they met. But it wasn't only one. It sounded like a whole herd, mixed with the shouts of men atop them. Fina led Endo toward a small nearby grove of trees, hoping to lose their pursuers in them. Endo held his breath and waited for the sound of the horse hoofs to die down. It looked as though they had not seen them. Who are these men? Endo asked Fina desperately. She seemed to have been expecting them, and clearly wasn't wanting to. Those are the king's men, his cavalry, I suppose, she said quietly, still not looking at Endo. It's not safe on the river path now. We should camp by the trees. They should be gone by morning. As she turned, Endo grabbed her wrist and spoke fiercely. You have to tell me what's going on. Why are the king's men after you, and what is this Aladat that Abe spoke to Hakim of? Fina looked startled at the mention of the Aladat. At the realization that Endo must have overheard the conversation in Abe's hut the night she arrived, she gave a deep sigh. I'm a seer from Almanac. It's to the far west of here. About 2 months ago, King Halim of Rook began having dreams that disturbed him, dreams that he is interpreting as visions depicting his downfall. I was called to elucidate these dreams and show him either what they mean or how they can be stopped. Endo gave her a confused look. So why are his men hunting you? Fina continued on. I saw his visions, Endo. I saw them clearer than even the king can. I saw you. You what? What are you saying? Said Endo nervously. The gods created you to rival the king. You are his downfall, Endo. You want to know why I'm on the run? Because I refused to give him your location. I fled from Rook to Mortu, where I came upon Abe, and he took me to you. Fina looked manic, as if saying this was the most important thing she would ever tell anyone. Endo looked back at Fina with disbelief. You want me to kill the king? Why? What has he done? What makes you think it's me that you're seeing in these visions? Endo, shouted Fina exasperatedly. Look at the facts. You just happened to wake up in a forest with no memory of your life before. You have this immense power, a power to rival a king, and it all happens to coincide with Halim's visions. I flee to Mortu, where I meet Abe, and he unknowingly brings me right to you. This isn't a coincidence, Endo. This is fate. But why? Why am I to kill a king I've never met? What makes him deserve this fate? Said Endo. The Aladat, Fina said simply. The Aladat is the king's newest decree. Rook is the capital of Elderkut. He rules all of this land, and the Aladat means that he rules the people inside of it to an unimaginable degree. Despite his confusion, Endo was still listening raptly as Fina continued on. For the men, it means working them through extreme physical tests of strength. The strongest are forced to join the army, while the weakest... Fina trailed off. She looked disgusted. The weakest are disposed of. Most of them are young boys. As for the women, the Aladat means they are married to him above their husbands. The Aladat makes us his playthings. The two sat in silence for a time. Fina seemed to be letting Endo absorb all of this information. When he finally spoke, he did so with determination. He must be stopped, said Endo simply. Fina nodded in agreement. We will go to Mortu, cross the river, and from there we will head to Rook. They spent the rest of the night in silence, waiting for any sound that did not belong to the trees around them, though they heard none. When the sunlight pierced through the trees, Endo left the grove to search for animals to hunt, as they hadn't set out traps the night before. The night's revelations were weighing heavily on his mind. He was created with the sole purpose of destroying a man he'd only just learned about. Even more peculiar still, he was technically no older than 2 months. Everything that he had learned, it wasn't repressed. He simply didn't belong to this world. The gods themselves had created him with one purpose, but he didn't feel blessed. He was little more than a tool for fate. He felt a sense of bitterness, a resentment for a destiny that he wasn't sure he had any real interest in fulfilling. Endo, with 2 rabbits, made his way back to the grove where Fina kept watch at the camp. They cooked and ate in silence, which Endo had become very familiar with, and packed up to make their way further south to Mortu. The next few days were fairly uneventful. Endo was beginning to grow tired of the plains, and couldn't await to arrive at a city that was said to be bigger than Sid. Let me do the talking once we arrive, said Fina as they drew closer. Endo could see the outline of a massive walled city in the distance. Half of it seemed to be built on the river it lay beside. From the other side of the river to the western lands, there seemed to be another city, with large boats ferrying the citizens across. Endo stood wide-eyed until Fina elbowed him in an attempt to get his attention. We can't get in through the main gate. Halim will definitely have guards patrolling. It would also be wise to stay off the streets as much as possible. Follow me. She then darted off to the right side of Mortu's walls. They walked in a counterclockwise fashion for quite some time before finding what looked to be a horse stable. There was one man adorned with torn clothing at the stable who had rugged hair and a scraggly beard. Endo prepared to walk past the man inconspicuously, but Fina walked right up to him and embraced him. Hassan, it's good to see you, she said with a smile. Fina, what are you doing back here? Shouldn't you be as far east as possible? Said Hassan with a note of worry in his voice. There is something more important to be taken care of now. Can you get my friend and I into the city discreetly? Fina replied, looking over at Endo. Hassan gave Endo a curious look before turning his attention back to Fina. Yeah, of course I can do that, Hassan shrugged. Stay here in the stables until dusk, and then we'll get you in the usual way. What's the usual way? Endo said to Fina. She replied with a sly smile. You'll just have to wait and see now, won't you? I hate this, said Endo irritably to the barrel next to his. He was laying uncomfortably on his side in an already half-filled hay barrel, and the motion of the horse carriage they were in was making him feel ill. You sure complain a lot for someone who's destined to save us all, said Fina's barrel in a matter-of-fact voice. Is that why we're here? I'd almost forgotten, replied Endo sarcastically. Oh gods, we are doomed, aren't we? Said Fina in a mock-dramatic sigh. With you as my guide? Yeah, we just might be. And oh yeah, have I told you how much I hate this? Endo repeated.